The drone industry is moving extremely fast, and the ag drone industry is an even newer, younger, faster moving subset of the drone industry. So you can never rest in this industry. You always need to be looking out for the best sensors on the market, the most reliable sensors, the best approaches algorithmically to path planning and obstacle avoidance. Constantly be innovating, or else you're going to be left in the dust.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 389. Are agricultural drones coming to a farm near you? For that question, we turn to Arthur Erickson, CEO of Hylio. Hylio develops and offers innovative drone systems that automate precision agricultural treatments. Using Hylios technology, farmers or producers can apply crop treatments directly to problem areas, targeting pests and deficiencies with more accuracy and efficacy. This allows farms to increase yields, and it has propelled Hylio to one of the top manufacturers of precision agricultural drones. Arthur's interest in UAS began when he was studying aerospace engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. While there, he worked with a research team to deploy drones for disaster prediction, response, and transportation optimization. Recognizing the enormous potential of UAS technology, Arthur, along with classmates Mike Oda and Nikhil Dixit, decided to form Hylio in 2015. While initially a drone delivery company based in Costa Rica in 2017, the team saw greater opportunities in the precision agricultural industry. Today, Arthur leverages his technical and management experience to lead Hylio as it applies its revolutionary drone technology to the global ag sector. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Arthur talks about Hylio, how the company evolved into a leading precision agricultural drone manufacturer, and how UAS technology benefits farm organizations of all sizes. But before we hear from Arthur, I want to thank those of you who have been supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have a great story on the use of drones that you'd like to share in a podcast, contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's learn how drones are changing the agricultural industry with Arthur Erickson of Hylio. Let's pick up the interview where I ask Arthur to introduce himself.
My name is Arthur Erickson. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of a company called Hylio. That's Hylio, Hylio. And here at Hylio, we design, manufacture, and then offer and sell crop spraying autonomous drone solutions. UAVs that do precision crop care treatments. That's liquid applications, but also granular and seed applications.
Arthur, Hylio is not the only manufacturer of precision agricultural drones. What makes Hylio stand out among others in the industry?
Actually, right now in the industry, it is very much dominated by foreign-made, primarily Chinese-made drones. So a large company called DJI makes more than 80% of the world's drones, and that goes for ag and non-ag drones. And we are one of, I can count on one hand, like 2 or 3 companies in the United States that actually makes their drone technology here domestically. So that is a very unique thing about us right now. We are uniquely positioned in the space that way. We have a much different philosophy, I would say, than DJI, in that DJI, being a very large company that has a lot of other revenue streams, actually ag is the smallest arm of their business. They mostly focus on making media drones, camera drones. They are going for a quantity over quality approach. If I could simplify it, that's not the whole story, but that's a simplification. We are going for a much more deep value, fine-tuned B2B solution with our products. We know that we can't make, at least right now, we can't make as many drones per day as DJI because they are a multi-billion-dollar company. But we know that we can connect with the U.S. farmer better, the U.S. service provider better, and listen to their feedback and create a better, more finely tuned solution for their use case that's going to ultimately give them more ROI. So we are your good listeners. We are your good B2B partner, and DJI products and the other foreign-made products might be a little bit cheaper up front, but you pay for it in the long run, I would say, because you're going to get noticeably less attention in terms of support, and they're not going to be able to find tailored solutions for your business or your operation.
What's the story behind the company? Where did the idea come from?
In 2015, which was 8 years ago now, I was a student at the University of Texas at Austin studying aerospace engineering. And in our curriculum, we did a lot of drone-related work. So we were building out drone systems, tweaking the software, building the software from scratch, I should say, and just seeing how that affected the flight performance and the capabilities of the drones. So I had the drone skill set, the drone passion. I was rooming with people that I had known from high school, a gentleman named Nikhil and another gentleman named Mike Oda. And Nikhil is now our CTO and Mike is our CFO. They were my original co-founders. So at the time I was studying drones, as I mentioned, we were seeing all sorts of news articles about how exciting drones were going to be in the drone delivery space. Amazon and Google were at that time just getting into it. And so we looked at that. We said, hey, this is a hot new industry. And we decided that we were going to make we called it a democratized delivery drone system that was very simple to use, that small, medium, and large businesses could utilize. And we hoped that this would create a lot of value for people worldwide, but also would catch the attention of Amazon or Google, one of these big players. And we had hoped that our technology would maybe one day be integrated or acquired by one of those big guys. So that's how it started. Typical startup story in a dorm room where we had our eyes on the prize, so to speak, and wanted to just make a product and see where it went. We actually took that idea. We made a prototype, a drone delivery prototype, which was the hardware itself, but the software to just pick a place. You could pick a destination, a coordinate, and the drone would then take a package there and drop it off automatically. It was a rudimentary prototype, but it did the job. It was our MVP, minimum viable product. We took it to Central America because at the time, the regulations in the U.S. were extremely prohibitive. It was very difficult. There's a lot of red tape to take a delivery drone and fly it in any sort of semblance of a real situation, right? So flying over or near buildings or people was pretty much impossible, legally speaking. So we took it to Central America, where some partners that we ended up meeting in Costa Rica were able to help us secure some provisional permits to do drone deliveries in Costa Rica in urban areas. So we did that for about 9 or 10 months, realized we weren't really into it. It was complicated from a regulatory perspective, even there where it was a lot looser than the States here. And so we just figured we weren't getting our technology to the customers and we weren't creating that value as fast as we wanted to with all the roadblocks in the way. So we pivoted to ag. Ag was one of the things that we had been contemplating from the get-go. I mean, in addition to delivery, it was always like, okay, drone technology can do delivery, it can do surveillance, it can do military applications, it can do agriculture stuff. So ag was still is a very underappreciated market, I think. Meaning there's not so much money going to new innovations in the space. It's mostly just the big guys like Case and John Deere who are quote unquote innovating, but there's not a lot of young startups, I think, getting into the space. And it was especially the case back then. So anyway, we saw a relatively untapped market. We had technology that could already deliver material. So it was relatively easy for us to take our delivery drone prototypes, put liquid tanks on them, and instead of delivering coffee and medicine, we were just going to deliver agricultural chemicals over crops. It was a fairly easy transition for us, physically speaking, and the rest is history. So by early 2017, we were doing strictly agricultural applications, and we've been doing that ever since. So to wrap all that up, in summary, we did have a brief stint as a drone delivery company, but we pivoted that technology into the ag technology we make now.
Was the time spent in Central America a sort of test bed for the company? I mean, were you able to use the research and learn about agriculture, which in turn was used to refine the technology?
Yeah, that's right. So when we were down there, of course, naturally, we met all sorts of people, and agriculture is a huge part of the economy in Central America in general. So it was fairly easy for us to, like I just mentioned, create a prototype for crop spraying. And then we just immediately turned around and said, hey, who here wants to get their crop sprayed? Because in Central America, they have much worse infrastructure than we have here in the United States, for example, especially in the ag industry. So they don't have the nice fancy tractors that we have up here in any sort of significant number. I mean, maybe the largest farms have one or two of the nicest tractors. It's not like here where everybody has access to this mechanized approach to agriculture. So they were still doing things traditionally where people would go out, day laborers would go out and spread fertilizer and herbicides and stuff by hand or in a backpack sprayer. So there was an immediate need for it. And basically a lot of the farmers down there were just chomping at the bit to have access to our crop spraying service. So it ended up being very easy for us to get contracts. But then the work, of course, ended up being difficult because we were working with prototype systems at the time that had a lot of bugs and a lot of flaws. So by day, we would spray farmers' land and we would get paid per application, per hectare, per acre, essentially, right, that we sprayed. And by night, we would say, hey, here's what went wrong today. You know, this software bug stopped us for an hour, or this hardware issue caused a crash. And so by night, we were doing that debriefing, lessons learned kind of analysis. And then we'd be making repairs and improvements to the software and the hardware for the next day of spraying. So that continued in Central America, not just in Costa Rica, but Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras for about 3 years. So from 2017 to 2020, we did that. And like you mentioned, that was essentially our testing ground. We were making money, fortunately enough, to keep us afloat, basically breaking even. And it was just a really good opportunity for us to be our first customers, so to speak, right? Ultimately, we wanted to produce this technology and not be service providers. And that was our way.
What did you learn during that time, and how did it affect the design or operation of Hylio drones?
There was a lot. And you can tell I'm pretty long-winded. I'm going to try to keep this concise and give some concrete examples. Symmetry. So LiDARs are relatively cheap. They're very accurate in most cases, but we soon learned that in our use case, when you're flying over crops and the crops are often very sunny, reflective in the middle of the day, for example, when the sun is just beating down on them, there's moisture everywhere because you're spraying liquid chemicals. That's causing a lot of reflectivity on the plants. That caused the LiDARs to malfunction, not all the time, but occasionally. And when they would malfunction, then the drone had all sorts of issues. It didn't know how high it was. We had some problems where the drone would continually climb because the LiDAR, for example, was not reflecting right off of the crops and it was reading a value of 0. So the drone thought it had to keep climbing and climbing and climbing. So we'd have to do like an emergency landing. So that's one concrete example of something we learned. We learned LiDAR wasn't right for this application, whereas it might be good for autonomous cars or something. It's just a different industry where you don't have that same reflectivity issue. And so in response to that, we switched to radars for altimetry. So the radars do a lot better. They can penetrate through the crops, penetrate through dust, fog, et cetera. They're much more reliable. That's one change that you see that's evident in our systems now that we had to learn the hard way. Software is more like death by 1,000 cuts. So in the beginning, 2017, 2018, we had some features that were cloud-based, right? Edge computing, cloud computing, all that stuff. I mean, it's still prevalent today, but we were trying to leverage like some APIs to provide the maps, for example, that you're looking at when you're marking your fields and creating these boundaries for your spray areas. That was linked to the internet. We soon found out the hard way that there often isn't a lot of internet, either zero or very bad connection in a lot of these rural areas. So then we quickly had to design systems that allowed you to work completely offline, communication systems with the drone where you're just communicating directly line of sight, radio telemetry to the drone, to and from the computer, and the ability to save map tiles to use offline. You can cache them right when you're online and then use them offline. That's something that our platform boasts now that still a lot of our competition, like the DJI drones, don't have. DJI drones to this day, for whatever reason, still require an internet connection for most of their functionality. So if you're in rural Kansas and Nebraska where the cell signal is very weak, you're kind of shit out of luck using some of those other products.
How about the drones themselves? How much can they carry?
We have a compact model, which we call the AG110, and that can carry just over 2.5 gallons. That's our smallest unit. It actually falls under the FAA's 55-pound limit, so that has some advantages depending on the organization and what you're trying to do with it. And then our biggest drone that we offer right now is the AG272, and that carries 18 gallons of liquid payload. About 450 pounds when it takes off with a full payload, max thrust of about 600 pounds. And then we have two models in between those two. So we have another one that carries about 4.5 gallons and another one that carries 8 gallons.
For the larger drone, how many acres would it normally cover?
So with that drone, I would say you're typically targeting a 2 gallon per acre rate when you're treating crops with that drone. And at that dosage, you could spray about 50 acres per hour. Of course, assuming that you've got decently set up fields ahead of you. If you're trained, you know what you're doing, there's not a lot of lag and unforced error in your operation, then you're going to see about 50 acres per hour per drone at that 2 gallon per acre rate. And then if you're doing smaller areas where you're having to pack up and travel a lot, that's going to drop a little bit. And if you're doing really nice, ideal areas that are just wide open, flat, minimal planning, minimal movement, then you might do a little bit more than that.
You probably get this question a lot. How do agricultural drones compare to using tractors or helicopters or planes? What are the pros and cons?
Okay, we'll start with pros, of which there are many. Try to be concise. Precision. The precision aspect of it is huge. It's simply something that you can't do. Like, for example, versus helicopters and airplanes, you can't just pick a patch of 1 or 3 or 5 weeds, spray just that. With the drones, of course, you can do that. So using drone imagery or satellite imagery, you can create a heat map, a prescription map, and just go, I'm going to spray the 10% of my field that actually needs treatment because that's where the fungal outbreaks are, the weed outbreaks. And I'm going to save all that time and input that I otherwise would have just blanket approached this field with. So, you call a plane or a helicopter, first of all, economically, they're not even incentivized to come out and just spray patches in your field. They're going to say, oh, no, I'll do 2,000 acres minimum. You have 2,000 acres. If you're a smaller farmer than that, then maybe sometimes they won't even come out. But yeah, they're just going to ask you to spray everything. And so you're sitting there as a farmer being like, all right, I'm way over spraying, but at least it's better than me losing my entire crop. So that's unfortunately the rock and the hard place that a lot of farmers are in using that system. The drones don't have that problem. If you so wished, you could just spray those problem areas. Drones can also spray every single acre of your field too, if you wanted them to. Now, okay, to segue into a con, drones do not carry nearly as much in their payload as these big traditional pieces of equipment. So a tractor can carry several hundreds of gallons. A big airplane can do the same thing. Helicopters are on the smaller end, usually like 50 to 100 gallons. But long story short, if you're trying to spray a chemical product or an input that requires several hundred pounds per acre, like we're talking like the early or pre-season fertilizers, that's not ideally done with drones given their small payloads. Drones are great for fungicides, herbicides, mid to late season stuff, foliar feed, fertilizers, stuff of that nature. They're just not good for that really heavy stuff, which really just comes in the form of that early season or pre-season fertilizer. So that's one weakness. Let's go over to cost. So I'll try to give you some concrete numbers. So let's say you have a tractor, one of these high clearance sprayers, like there's like the Haggy line, right? They'll run you, I'd say about $300,000 to $400,000 right now for a mid-tier model, one of those. And with that high clearance ground tractor sprayer, you could probably cover, let's call it 75 to 100 acres per hour. Now, with two of our big drone, the AG272 that I mentioned earlier, you could cover about the same, about 100 acres per hour. 75, 100 acres, that's pretty reasonable. So you got a light comparison there in terms of efficiency. Now, our 272 drones together is going to run you about $150,000. So that's already half the price of the initial investment that you would have paid for that tractor, if not like a third of the price, depending on the bells and whistles you got for that tractor. So initially, the drones are cheaper. They can do the same amount of work per hour, but you also have cheaper operating costs with the drones. So a typical tractor these days would run you with diesel costs and maintenance and all of that cost of ownership, anywhere from, I'd say, $150 to $200 per hour to run a tractor. Now, these two drones, if you're running them doing this 100 acres per hour, would run you closer to like $80 per hour. So again, you're at maybe like 35 to 40% of the operating cost of this tractor. So both initially on the initial capital investment, you're a third or a half the price, and operating, you're half or even cheaper the price than the tractor. And that's not to mention, again, that you can do all these precision spray things with the drones that you can't do with the tractor.
Do drones provide an option to replace tractors or helicopters, or are they seen as augmenting these options?
I'd say for now, it's certainly augmenting. I personally do envision a future where the other stuff isn't necessary at all. But like I mentioned, there's still that heavy fertilizer application that a lot of people do that you'd either want to have a tractor around for, or call in an airplane or whatever is most convenient for you for that one application. But for the other 5 or 6 that you would do throughout the season, the drones are perfectly adequate even today. Now, eventually, the drones are going to get even bigger. So 18 gallons is the biggest one we offer now, but I wouldn't be surprised if we were having this conversation in 5 years and we make drones that are 100 gallons. So they're going to be helicopter sized, more or less, basically autonomous helicopters. Furthermore, they're going to be so automated too that instead of actually just having like one giant drone, you could have 4 or 5 20-gallon drones. And they're still doing a heck of a lot of work because that's still 100 gallons up in the air at one time, just spread across 4 or 5 drones, right? And they would be autonomous to the point where they're coming back, refilling and recharging without your direct intervention as the pilot or operator. So when we get there, which I think is going to happen in the next 3 to 6 years, I don't really see a big need for helicopters, tractors, planes, or really any of the traditional stuff. I should clarify, tractors still useful for planting and tilling and things of that nature, right? I don't see drones doing that. So a tractor is always going to be on your farm, probably going to be an autonomous tractor, almost exclusively for everybody in 3 to 5 years. But it's going to do that physical, like earth moving stuff and planting stuff. The drones aren't going to do that.
How have the spray mechanisms changed over the years?
There's been a lot of advancement in optimizing how the spray application comes out of the drone in relation to the drone's aerodynamic features. So what's different about drones is that you've got the downwash from the propellers, which is definitely a huge advantage. So the downwash from the propellers allows you to spray a finer mist, which is going to actually give you better chemical penetration with any product that you're spraying. And normally, if you were spraying that out of a tractor, you'd actually be worried about the ambient wind carrying those particles away. But with the drone, since you have that downward force, you can spray this finer mist-like application and drive it into the crops and not worry about that drift fear. That's a big advantage. As an industry, we are developing different nozzle types, different pumps, things like that to optimize the pattern that comes out of these drones when they're flying, because you need to take all that into account. The downwash from the drone, as well as how fast it's moving and all of that. It introduces a lot of factors that you need to consider, but I'd say at this point, they're fairly refined. So if you want to go spray just like a 5-foot strip on your farm or along a fence line or something, we now are accurate enough to where you are spraying really just at 5 feet. You might be off to the left and the right by a few centimeters, but that's it, if you're using RTK and the right nozzle setup.
Are all crops considered equal in terms of receiving the benefit provided by a spray drone? Or are some crops better candidates than others?
Really, all crops are fair game. I would say there's a lot of overlap in just standard operating procedures, pretty much for all crops. There are caveats, or I should say, you need to take a different approach with things such as trees, like pecan trees, orchards in general. An orchard is going to have a different situation where basically, if I could dive into it, like corn, soybeans, other row crops, you're pretty much just flying at one consistent height over the entire thing and just doing a nice even spread over all the plants. Now, in an orchard, what you want to actually do is map out the height of all of the trees, basically a point cloud of terrain data for the drone to follow. Because with orchards, the challenge is that you're dipping down between the trees, right? If you allowed the radar to just follow the height of the trees, you'd have a lot of variability. And the drone would like jump up and down as it goes between trees. And that's why I'm saying you would need to preload terrain data for the drone to follow versus following its radar sensor in an orchard scenario, which is what we do. That's how we approach orchards. I know that was kind of like a in the weeds answer, but it's versatile. You can use it for many different crops, including orchards, specialty crops, row crops. You just have to have different technical approaches to the different crops.
How would you describe the precision agriculture market?
It's massive. Like I can say personally, sitting here, just seeing how our operation is growing and our sales are growing, there seems to be unlimited demand for this technology. We are maxing out our production, right? And there's a bit of a wait for our drones because they're in such high demand, which is a good thing. We are scaling up appropriately so we can deliver the amount of drones that the market wants. But right now, it seems that everybody has heard of spray drones by this point, and everybody wants to get their hands on one. So I think the precision ag market is just booming, especially because our need for food as a civilization, as a society, is never going away. So I think as we see a lot of turmoil in the global economy and uncertainty and supply chain issues, one thing we know for sure is that food's always going to be important. So I could see the precision ag market becoming increasingly important and attractive from an investment perspective in the coming decade because of all those reasons.
Looking at your customers, who's using your drones? I assume large organizations for sure, but are you getting down to the small mom and pop size farm organizations as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We sell to all sorts of organizations. So on the government end, we sell to the USDA. We sell to some DoD contractors, Department of Land Management, for example, or Bureau of Land Management, I should say. And then you've got your ag retailers such as Nutrien, Corteva, down to your farmers. So both larger corporate farms or co-ops, collections of thousands of acres, and your mom and pop farms of just 2, 3, 500 acres. We sell it to everyone. You get a very versatile tool. So if you're spraying a smaller farm, you might spray just every single acre and just replace all of your equipment with this drone. If you have a very large farm, you might use the drone to spray the edges or the smaller lots that are less convenient with your traditional equipment. And you might still hold on to your big tractor or your airplane or something to spray the nice big open field, for example.
What have the past 7 years taught you about the drone industry?
One thing is that you definitely need to stay on your toes. So the drone industry is moving extremely, extremely fast. And the ag drone industry is an even newer, younger, faster moving subset of the drone industry. So you can never rest in this industry. That's something I've learned. You always need to be looking out for the best sensors on the market, the most reliable sensors, the best approaches algorithmically to path planning and obstacle avoidance. Constantly be innovating, or else you're going to be left in the dust. Also, I think I've learned that it's dangerous to try to outsmart the customer base or the market, and instead you should just very deliberately seek out and absorb customer feedback. Don't ignore what the customers are saying about your product and how they're using them. Don't waste a bunch of time creating a feature that nobody actually wants or cares about. And then conversely, don't ignore the plight of your customers if they say, oh, this one software feature is very unintuitive, or, oh, I wish you could fold it up like this. It'd be much more easier to transport, for example. You need to really pay attention to the customer feedback, and that should be driving all of your product decisions in this space, I think. And we've seen a lot of trouble with other startups in the past that have come and gone because they tried to, promise the world and outsmart the market, like I was saying, and they just ended up not having a valuable proposition.
So what's next for Hylio?
Well, I had mentioned earlier that fortunately we're receiving very high demand. So we are currently building a new facility, actually, trying to triple our production capacity here. And so the next 2, 3, 4 years is all about scaling up and, of course, innovating all the while. So incorporating better and better software tricks into our platform, sleeker hardware, more reliable hardware, but also just being able to make more of it, more units in a given day. That's where we're going. So just full steam ahead, pack more bodies into that shop, get more great young, ambitious team members on board, and just grow with the industry.
And for my final question, Arthur, what message would you like to leave regarding the future of the drone industry?
I think extremely promising. So I would just encourage any younger people, people of any age that are listening to this, to really consider getting involved in the space, either just working with a company or even starting your own service or company, because I very much believe that these drones are going to dominate almost every single industry within our lifetime. So it's a place to be. It's a very exciting field, and we could always use more ambitious, creative people in it.
That's it for episode 389 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Arthur Erickson of Hylio. I want to thank Arthur for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about Hylio or want to connect with Arthur, check out the webpage at hyl.io. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Gores.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.